Hello! Welcome back to Galactic Initiative. We resume our discussion of The Empire Strikes Back for its 40th anniversary. You should listen to Part 1 if you haven't done so. I am your host, Jeff. David and Sean remain at their microphones. Let's continue. Shortly after leaving Hoth, Han and the crew of the Falcon discover that the Falcon cannot go to hyperspace. They are locked into this race against the Imperial fleet. The solution becomes the asteroid field. Let me get your thoughts.
I mean, it was exciting. It was dynamic. You feel the urgency. You feel, the pressure of the Empire. Again, we have more humor with the ship and with Han Solo. It's not my fault. Han Solo is one of the best star pilots in the galaxy, as we've been told. He's still going to bounce a few asteroids off his ship. It all just plays into that whole, the narrative about the Falcon and how it's not entirely reliable. But it's a very intense, very fast-paced scene, and there's a lot of danger and there's a lot of things going on there that really propel it, and make it feel awesome.
It also gave us a really good idea of what type of a pilot Han was, and I know, like Sean was just mentioning, he bounced a couple asteroids off of the hull, but he pulled off some pretty cool moves, and it's the first time that we really saw the Falcon go, was it vertical? Vertical. Pretty cool to see.
It enhances the reputation that Solo has, knowing all the tricks and being a smuggler. He's like, yeah, we're going to go hide out in an asteroid field. And of course, 3PO freaks out and starts talking about the odds again. It's such a trick, right? Not only is he a great pilot, as David said, being able to avoid all of these asteroids and fly through that and do all those things. He's also, he's wily, and he's got that experience. Like, these guys aren't going to be able to find me, or they're going to take serious losses in the attempt to try and find me if I go hide out in this place.
Compared to A New Hope, 3PO has a lesser role in the film. Did you like that wrinkle of 3PO being marginalized, and yet he knows what the problem is and he's been trying to communicate it the entire time?
3PO continues to be annoying. He continues to be that, you just want him to shut up. And it almost becomes a boy who cried wolf scenario, where it's like he's just so much extra noise to these characters that even when he's saying the right thing, hey, check out the hyperdrive, they're done with him. They're over the noise, and so they're not hearing the message. It works. It's not so overdone that it's a groaner where you're like rolling your eyes at the whole thing, but it fits. Again, so much of this movie fits in the narrative and the growth and the development and the continuation of these characters' stories. Like, by the end of A New Hope, we had a little 3PO fatigue, and in this movie, you continue to build upon that. We all have a little bit more 3PO fatigue, to the point where even when he's telling us the way to get out of the scenario and save our skins, we're just annoyed with him and we want to turn him off.
3PO asks Han where his ship learned to communicate. And of course, it will pay off in Solo with L3's consciousness being uploaded into the Falcon. The plan for L3, is it a Lucas idea, or the writers and directors of Solo are just building on a Lucas idea?
That's a great question. Because it obviously now fits perfectly. I don't know. I think I would think it would be very far-fetched to think that was something Lucas had in mind way back when. But now, knowing how computers communicate with one another, I think it was a pretty easy jump for the writers of Solo to be able to put something in.
We had talked earlier on in this discussion about whether or not Lucas was prescient or lucky. And I don't think that this is kind of a throwaway line. In this universe, we have robots and computers that have personalities. And so it's not beyond the realm of possibility that your ship might take on an attitude. I don't know if retroactively the writers of Solo were trying to, pick pieces out of the original trilogy to structure their story around, and this thing came up, or if.
I hope so. That would be nice.
Well, no, but I mean, but in the sense that I don't know if they said we're going to create the character of L337 to pay off that line in Empire. I wonder if, as a larger story conversation that was going on was, hey, we have these characters and we want to tell this story, and how do we make it all fit the narrative? And that would be a lot of work to get to the point where you develop something like that to pay off one throwaway line of dialogue in Empire. But I don't see why they wouldn't. I don't see why, but I don't think it was a Lucas idea per se, where he's planting the idea for future storytelling that the Falcon has a personality, or that it has that its computer has an attitude problem, or is giving 3PO back talk. But at the same time, it kind of also plays into what I said earlier, is that everybody's tired of 3PO, including the computer on the Falcon. Because he's coming back like, why is this thing giving me attitude? And it's like, well, because you're probably annoying it right now, like everybody else on the ship. Thank you, 3PO. Thank you, Professor.
Interesting to see 3PO in the R2-D2 role. Without R2-D2, 3PO is the only droid on board, and it's his responsibility to communicate with the Falcon. And that's interesting that he can step into that role to a certain extent. He can't perform repairs in the way that R2-D2 can, but he certainly can interface with the Falcon and diagnose things for the crew. So that was interesting. At one point, Vader receives notification from an officer, I believe it's Admiral Piet, that the Emperor wants to make contact. And we've heard the Emperor mentioned, but for the first time in The Empire Strikes Back, we will see the Emperor. I hesitate to say meet because it's a short scene, it's a holographic transmission, but based on Vader's reaction, we understand the gravity of this message. He commands Piet to take the ship out of the asteroid field immediately and send a clear transmission. So let me have your thoughts and opinions on the original 1980 version of the Emperor and the conversation that takes place about Luke and killing him or turning him to the dark side, and the special edition tweaks bringing in the Emperor Palpatine that we've grown to know and love.
Going back, I really liked the original version. Again, not because I'm a purist, but because it didn't show the Emperor's face. You didn't really get a good idea of what he looked like. I really like that. Less sometimes is more.
As a child growing up and being very much into all of this and playing with the toys and creating our own headcanon in the years between films and whatnot, I never really thought about the Emperor. I was really more worried about what Vader was up to. We know that there is the Empire, and so by extension there is an Emperor, but then of course we see him, or again, air quotes, we use that term loosely, we see him in in Empire Strikes Back, having him be cloaked and hooded and mysterious, and not in the original version, not entirely human. I believe that there was, I forget what they said, something was like monkey eyes that they used for the, or a version on the mask that the person wore under the hood that they filmed. We have roughly a physical form about him, and it's also malevolent. He's not just a standard politician. He's not a military guy. He doesn't want to show you his face. So there's mystery there. There's this, of course, a dark foreboding because Vader kneels before him. So the two big things right there. One, we did a 180-degree turn from Vader driving his fleet to the point of destruction in order to catch the Millennium Falcon. They're all in the asteroid field. People are dying around him, and he's like, I don't care. Nothing is going to stop me. And then Piet, pokes his head around the corner and says, call coming from the Emperor, boss. He's like, turn it all around. We're done. Like, I got to go. Let's get out of the asteroid field. I need a clear, got to get good signal on my cell phone so I can call the boss. And then when he's actually addressing the Emperor, he's taking a knee. the character of Vader has risen in his power, the size of his flagship, and the way he's killing his officers when they disobey him and all this. Like, we're really pushing the evil of Vader and, you know, the callousness of his command, you know, to another level. And then he immediately turns and kneels to the Emperor, even though we don't see him fully, even though he's not, you know, fully revealed to us. We are instinctively told that this dude is even badder than Vader, and he's important. And then, of course, the conversation that happens is, you know, hey, we're running the galaxy, and there's this Skywalker, and, you know, and he's force user, and this is a big threat, and we got to deal with it. And the conversation of how they're going to work that out. But you can definitely tell that the Emperor now has gone from, again, a throwaway line in a previous movie, you know, how will the Emperor maintain control without the bureaucracy, to the baddest baddie in the film series at this point, because he's the one who, you know, can command that kind of you know, respect or fealty from Vader.
Though we only see the Emperor for a minute or so, do you prefer the original 1980 version or the Return of the Jedi prequel version?
I like the original.
Personally, you like the original, David? Okay. I like the original conversation. But I prefer the fact that they brought Ian McDiarmid back into it in the special edition simply for continuity's sake. But I'm not a big fan of the fact that they altered the conversation. Dialogue is different. It's one of these changes that's minor, it's subtle, doesn't take you out of the film. Again, Empire Strikes Back and the quote unquote special edition of that is just, it's subtle enough. The changes are what I would anticipate the special edition of the original Star Wars film should be, not what we got in Episode 4. That's my opinion.
The Son of Skywalker was discussed in that scene, and it's a great foreshadowing for Vader later on. For me, that was why I really like that, plus the visual part. So for that, those are my reasons why.
I would say that makes perfect sense, David, and I'm in agreement with that. I just feel like the tying it all together, and I know there's people who are upset, and we'll probably get to this later, but you know, with the bringing in the voice, the changing the voice of Boba Fett. Again, it's a continuity smooth out. But I do like the fact that referring to him as the Son of Skywalker, it's almost like, you know, talking about yourself in the third person. The fact that the Emperor and Vader can sit there and talk about the Son of Skywalker as if Skywalker's another dude, you know, and yet he's right there, or at least what's left of him is right there. And that's another fascinating sort of psychological aspect of the whole Emperor-Vader relationship. As you look back on the dialogue, it's almost confusing. Like, why are these guys talking about the Son of Skywalker as if Skywalker was somebody else? And so I don't know if it originally was intended that way to throw the audience off just so the big reveal would be huge, or if it was changed to try and, I guess, smooth the way for the entire saga. I am not opposed to the special edition version.
We learn from the opening lines of the conversation that the Emperor is force sensitive, a very important thing to know for the third film. As you said, Sean, I didn't spend a lot of time dwelling on the Emperor after A New Hope, whether or not he could use the Force, whether or not he'd been a Jedi. His relationship with Vader is definitely a master and apprentice. To see Vader humbled from the moment Piet approaches him and tells him he needs to make contact with the Emperor. Does the Emperor seem convinced by Vader's argument to turn Luke? Even from the first viewing, I'd always gotten the sense that he was not convinced that it was a good idea to try to turn Luke. It definitely felt that he favored killing Luke over turning him.
Was it to replace Vader with somebody potentially more powerful? Because I have never thought that Luke was ever more powerful than Vader. So I guess I didn't really understand how that could be beneficial.
The Emperor mentions in this conversation that he is the downfall of their rule. And then Vader says, well, but what if we can turn him? So the implication is, if he's allowed to continue on that path, he's clearly going to be the end, at least according to what the Emperor has foreseen, that he is going to be the end of their rule. Vader presents this option that if we turn him to the dark side, then maybe we can change that destiny, right? We can maintain our rule, but then we can have a more powerful, or another and more powerful, dark side, enforcer to work for the Empire. However, to Jeff's question, I think the Emperor is sort of reticent on this whole thing because he knows that if Luke dies, no problem. Status quo is maintained. He's the Emperor. Vader is his henchman. And everything is fine. We don't really understand why the Emperor pauses in that moment. In real time in 1980, it would be the Emperor has been presented an option to expand his power and his control. He's weighed it. He's assessed the risk, and he's given the affirmative to Vader. But he's also kind of said, if we can't do it, we just need to kill him. After the prequel trilogy and after the Return of the Jedi, we find that that pause, that moment where he's not so sure about it, really comes from the fact that he, for the first time since the Jedi Temple, he can't trust Vader. Palpatine has figured out for the first time that Vader is no longer 100% his servant, and he sees the future, right? That Luke Skywalker is the end of the Emperor, or the Imperial rule or whatnot. But I don't think he fully realizes that it's because of Vader that Luke is the end, not Luke himself. We find, that the Rule of Two thing, of course, yes, came later. The discussion of that, all those things, but also, in my opinion, this conversation in retrospect after seeing the prequels is that we understand that Palpatine / Darth Sidious burns through apprentices because they are a means to an end. And the end for him was finding Anakin Skywalker because he was the most powerful Jedi, or was to be the most powerful Jedi, and he was the chosen one and all of that. That pause and that calculation that Palpatine takes in that moment of conversation with Vader is he's thinking, yeah, let's turn him, and then I can get rid of you, and I can have the full Skywalker apprentice of Luke, who's not a machine. He's a young man in his prime, and if I can turn him into what he will be what you should have been, Vader. That's what's going on. Again, we don't get that, of course, until we see the prequels, and until we've had the full, 6-film arc to observe and digest and to discuss the character of Palpatine and all of his, his machinations behind the scene. But it creates, of course, now in retrospect, in that moment that Jeff has asked about, where he pauses and thinks about it. There's so much going on now in that moment after the fact that it's not just like when we saw it the first time, where he's thinking about it and he's like, yeah, that could be a good idea, but that's sort of a plan B, kind of a deal. We'll go forward with that as far as we can take it. But after that, after we see all these movies and we have all this other stuff about who Palpatine is, it becomes even more intense of a moment. The fact that he's even considering this and what it means to Vader. Yeah, turn to the dark side, join me. We'll kill the Emperor. And it's again the perpetuation of the Rule of Two or whatnot, and the fact that Sith apprentices are always trying to kill their masters. Everybody's playing everybody in that moment. Vader's playing his angle, Palpatine's playing his angle, and it's a perfectly fine and calm and normal conversation between the two of them, but there's all this stuff going on in the background that makes it so intense.
Vader's hope for the entirety of The Empire Strikes Back is to find Luke and turn him to the dark side, kill the Emperor, rule the galaxy. The Emperor's perspective, yes, he could replace Vader with Luke. I guess he feels he can't lose. So if Vader destroys Luke, fine. If Vader turns Luke, fine. He will ultimately win.
It's very similar to the whole scene where Palpatine is in, on the ship and Dooku and Anakin are fighting. Palpatine's sitting there in that moment and he knows no matter what happens in this fight, he's going to win. Dooku is already a loyal apprentice and a loyal subject and will do whatever the Emperor or whatever Palpatine asks. If he ultimately kills Anakin, well, so be it. But if he kills Dooku, it puts him one step farther down the path to turning to the dark side and becoming his ultimate apprentice. Same thing in Return of the Jedi. Luke says it, your overconfidence is your weakness. And even Palpatine thinks that having the visions and having seen the future, that there is a possibility at some point, no matter how this thing plays out, that the best outcome would be for Luke to die. And there's got to be something of that in his mind and in the moment.
As Vader moves forward, he has the Emperor's permission to try to corrupt Luke and turn him, which he will do on Cloud City. Vader, for 2 films, for all his cunning and ruthlessness, fails the Emperor. There are comics and books filling the gap between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back and The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi that actually include punishments for Vader. Have you encountered any of that EU stuff?
I actually kind of like that concept. I mean, hey, you fail me again, I'm going to take more than just a hand. So straighten up, kid.
Straighten up. Well, there's some stuff in the modern Marvel that kind of discusses the Emperor's wrath for Vader's failures, and there's a whole storyline about, among other things, because they've purged the galaxy of Jedi, he's trying to, I don't want to say grow, but he's trying to artificially create other dark force users. One of the things that in this particular story arc is that Vader has to fight all of these people. The Emperor's like, I've created 6 or 8 of these people. They're either force users that I've found and turned, or they're like cyborgs and other stuff. And like there's a whole like arena Fight Club sort of feel to it and gladiator element. And he basically tells Vader, if you want to keep being my right hand, you got to go in there and you got to beat all these guys. And he ultimately, of course, does. But there's several conversations that happen in the modern Marvel Star Wars comics where the Emperor kicks the crap out of Vader or puts him in his place and, kind of lets him know, like, yes, you are the chosen one, and yes, you are my apprentice, but, I've killed people for lesser failures in the Empire. I'm being nice, which is hilarious, right? Palpatine's being nice to you. From episode 3, Vader learns that, Padme's dead and he freaks out and he crushes everything. There is a scene in one of the Marvel comics, where in that moment of his rage where he's lashing out at everything, he actually tries to force manhandle Palpatine. Palpatine nearly kills him. We do see stuff. I mean, and these Marvel comics are technically canonical because they're all under the Disney umbrella now or whatever. So we have seen these moments, but yeah, we don't ever see them in the films, which is interesting. The Darth Vader, the 2 Darth Vader series and the Vader Down short series did a lot to fill in the gaps and to expand his malevolence and his power, and kind of talk about his development as the right hand of Palpatine, as the leader of the 501st and whatnot.
But like we were saying before, Sean, I mean, the sad thing is in order to get all this character development, we have to go to second sources.
That's true, but it's also, it's in this case, in the case of Darth Vader, all of this stuff is just enhancing. If we didn't have any of it, it wouldn't take away from what we got. The big thing that I have a problem with, we have to consume that information in order to fully understand a film, in order to explain plot holes. You know, these other materials are used as a stopgap or as a way to cover mistakes, you know, in the sequel series. But the stuff that we're getting about Vader just makes Vader that much better.
So question for both of you. Why not a Vader series? Everybody's list, 1 or 2 top villains of all time.
Well, I'll disagree with Sean, respectfully, of course. I don't need or want more Vader. Vader's character is fantastic. He's my favorite character in Star Wars. Leave Vader with a little bit of mystery and leave him as the villain. He should be intimidating. He should be frightening. I don't want to watch A New Hope and be reflecting on a comic series where he's seeing ghosts of his dead wife. That just isn't something that I want. He's a main character, but he isn't. The time he spends on screen is so memorable and so impactful that you don't need a lot of him, and I certainly don't need conflicting emotions creeping into my perception of him through the first 2.5 movies of the original trilogy.
Okay, fair enough.
I did not say that I wanted more Vader. What I said was the Vader that we're getting,
that was me,
for the most part. I know you want more Vader. You want a Vader TV series, and you want, you know, plushies and more figures, and I get that.
Absolutely.
So, and there's nothing wrong with extra Vader figures and Vader plushies, but I'm not saying that I want more Vader, or like I want films or I want a TV show or whatever. I was just saying that the Vader that we're getting is, the stories are good and they enhance the character. The original conversation is basically, we don't need it, we're getting it, and it's good, so I'm not complaining about it, or it doesn't bother me. Like you said, you know, Jeff, we can watch the original trilogy, and we can have Vader, just those 3 movies, and the appearances in those 3 films, and we can have a fantastic character and a great story. The Disney sequel trilogy was so bad that we had to go do all that extra Poe Dameron and the extra Rey and the extra Finn and all the extra other stuff in order to try and piece together something that makes sense and is as a whole okay. And we can't just say, hey, those 3 movies were pretty solid and those characters were great. And we don't have to do that with this trilogy. And the stuff that we're getting, the few little things that have been added to it, are not taking away from it. At least in my opinion. Now, you might think that you know, all the extra stuff about Vader and what's going on inside the helmet is taking away from him as the malevolent force, and I can see some of that for sure. But things like his appearance in the Rebels cartoon, you know, was amazing, and it was perfectly in character, and it fit in line. He and Tarkin show up on Lothal, and he is full Vader. You know, he's like, you bureaucrats don't even know how to run a counterinsurgency program. What we're going to do is we're going to light this village on fire, and we'll see what rebels come running out to save them, and then we'll kill them. Like, he is pure Vader in that cartoon. You know, and yes, he's not a main character. He shows up at the end of the season to sort of, you know, remind everybody that this is Star Wars and it's happening at a certain time in the Star Wars universe, and that Vader is very much a going concern in the Empire. But it's not too much Vader, and it doesn't take away from him. And it's the same thing like this, the end of Rogue One. It doesn't take away from his legacy.
I agree. Rogue One, Rebels, the Vader in those projects aligns perfectly with the Vader that we know from the original trilogy.
I just think that the first Marvel run of Vader, that modern Marvel run of Vader, was very solid. But I didn't like the Dr. Aphra series, and that's not. I don't think that is, should reflect poorly on the character of Vader. It's just they tried to shoehorn him into that, and there's going to be hit and miss stuff with the the expanded universe.
I think they could have done a lot better with the Aphra thing. The 2 droids with Aphra, I think, were the best parts of that entire series. Honestly, if you would have used those 2 droids and Boba Fett and included Vader somewhat in it, that would have been an outstanding series. And I think it could have been better.
Well, see, I think the reason that other characters are always joining him is that Vader by himself can't sustain. So in a Vader series, I think you would need strong main characters. Vader would almost become a supporting character in his own story.
I think you could do that later on. But I mean, the way the comic books went, yes, there were a couple times where he had visions of Padme in the past, but you could really do a lot of really cool things with him being the main character and going on missions and things. I think it would be sweet. I would love to see more Vader.
See, and I think it would get old quickly.
So Jeff is correct in the assessment of Vader, in the sense that you can't make him the main character in a series simply because of who he is. He's the bad guy. You would have a problem promoting a television series where the main character, whom you are supposed to root for and, empathize with and follow, is a cold-blooded killer. Vader's just the worst of the worst. And we're not allowed to root for him. He murdered children, okay? He killed younglings. He has subjugated worlds. He's butchered thousands of people. You're glorifying this act of finding the good guys and killing them brutally on a weekly basis for however many 8, 10, 12 episodes. You just can't do it. The best way you can do more Vader is to do it like Rogue One. You're telling a larger story within the Star Wars universe, and if it's appropriate, Vader shows up and does Vader stuff to move the story along, and then we all get our fan service. We all get our our Vader that that we enjoy, the bad guy Vader, but we don't have to feel guilty as an audience that we're fully behind all this stuff. Yeah, I don't see it as being a viable television show on Vader by himself. Like you say, Jeff, you can't have him be the main character because it either becomes way too repetitive, but it's also way too dark.
All right, I yield.
I wasn't trying to beat you into submission, David. I was just making a point. I mean,
Too late.
it's a little hard.
No, I see your point. I mean, and I do understand. 14 hours of Vader just killing Jedi and killing people can get a little tedious.
It's fine as a video game. It doesn't work as a series. To go back to Force Unleashed, you can have those boss fights. That's a format where it works, but as a show or as a movie, less Vader is better than more Vader. Think about Vader's screen time. How much screen time do you think Vader actually gets in A New Hope?
8 minutes and 6 seconds. And then 11:51 for Empire and 13:44 for Jedi.
So what does that tell you? That's just the right amount of Vader.
Less is more.
Less is more with Vader.
Yeah, and how much did he get in Rogue One? Like less than that, even, right? 5 minutes?
Far less, yes.
Like 3 minutes, 4 minutes? Like, because he had his interaction with Krennic,
Right.
and then he had the killing the rebels at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And again, it's an appropriate use of Vader. We didn't have to have an hour a week for 10 weeks to make him, the villain or the most iconic villain in sci-fi.
Right. Those numbers are important. That data is meaningful. Ready to move on?
Yes.
Han is still pursued by a swarm of TIE fighters. No matter how many TIE fighters are destroyed by asteroids, there are always more to replenish the numbers. So he decides to look for a large asteroid and hide. He finds a cave, flies into it. Two important things we need to discuss. One, the romance between Han and Leia. Han will make his move. Leia will be stubborn in her refusal up until the moment where she's kissing him passionately. It's really well acted by both parties, and 3PO's interruption is fun. What say you guys?
I thoroughly enjoyed the whole scene. Han Solo in full Han Solo mode. He's dashing. I think that, Princess Leia, I'll put up the fight just to say that I put up a fight, but she plans to give in. But yeah, the banter, the back and forth, the Han Solo's comebacks to every type of protest that she throws up are fantastic. I think that it is as a segment of the film to establish the relationship between them, which is important later on in the film when we're talking about the dynamic between Lando and Han and what's going on in Cloud City. It doesn't overpower the film. It doesn't become a romantic comedy. It doesn't become a love story. It's a quiet moment in the film. They're trying to fix the ship. They're hiding out. The future's uncertain. We still have the unresolved conflict from the beginning of the movie. Why was she chasing him down the hall if she didn't care if he left? And why was he kind of egging her on and all of that if he didn't really care about how she felt about him? It's some classic dialogue. Yeah, no, I thought it was great. I enjoyed it.
I mean, from a kid's perspective, it wasn't overly mushy. It was very well done and romantic.
Yeah, it wasn't over the top. I don't, as a child, it didn't really bother me. I didn't be like, ew, and look away and all that kind of stuff. Of course, over the years, as you get older and all these things, it takes on different meanings and whatnot. But it never felt weird or out of place or uncomfortable, as maybe perhaps she kissed Luke earlier in the movie. The reason why she sneaks away, who knows? Is it because she's a princess and he's a nobody? Maybe. Is it because she's a senator or was a senator and he's a nobody? Maybe. Is it because she's his boss, basically, in the rebellion? Maybe. Or like the comic book says, maybe she needs to take a moment and self-assess and figure out what's actually going on, in her head and her heart.
It's interesting in listening to you guys talk about the kiss. You both went to your experience as children, and the fact that the romance didn't interfere with the action of the film for you.
Yeah, dude, when it was in the theater, I was 6.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
So 1980, I was 6 going on 7. I had a crush on Princess Leia, right? At that point in my life.
Dude, I was going to marry her, not you.
Well, and we would have had a fight to the death over that, I think. It would have been like an early scene in Conan when we're in the pit, Yeah, violence. Yeah.
After the kiss, Leia's sitting in the cockpit of the Falcon, and she's startled by a mysterious creature. Leia, Han, and Chewie investigate by leaving the ship.
With the masks.
Yep.
Han, after he shoots it, and then they go, and he's like, yeah, that's what I thought, Minox chewing on the power cables. Okay. And he's like, Chewie, go ahead and clear off.
Apparently there's gravity there, too.
Well, yeah. There's no gravity in your stomach, David?
Only going down.
Down.
Well,
space slug.
Yeah, we'll get to it. The environment is called into question. It doesn't look like a cave at all. It's has a spongy, wet texture to it. And so Han fires a blast into what he thinks is the floor of the cave. But as it turns out, it's the stomach of a giant space slug.
This is no cave.
They didn't move the set, but I think the characters did a great job swaying and moving as if they were going to fall. And then the movement of the camera, it actually works really well. I was very much convinced that things were spinning and shifting quickly. They're going to make a narrow escape through the jaws of a space slug that they mistook as the cave. So these creatures live in asteroids, dark places in the galaxy. The slug lurches out of its cave to grab them. It just misses. This thing is massive. How it survives in the vacuum of space, I don't know. Why it has gravity in its stomach, I don't know. David, you have the floor.
Yeah, this is one of my biggest issues with this movie. I mean, it actually kind of deflated me a little bit. I mean, I know you've got free reign to create any type of creatures and any type of aliens out there. But I mean, the thing's out in space, and it goes along the same lines as the space whales for me, even in Rebels. It just doesn't fit for me. Don't give me a big, silly goo-looking space slug with things sticking out of the side of its neck. It personally took me out of the movie.
As an adult, looking back on it and trying to put my science and my science fiction, yes, what David said is correct. I mean, we can try and explain it away. The environment that these guys get out in and wander around in, and the animals living inside the stomach. I mean, it's all compelling fiction that's kind of sciencey, but if you really want to try and make it work, it's very hard. And I don't know, I kind of felt it was weird. It was out of place. I get them trying to hide and fix the ship. In a movie like this, that in my mind is near perfect, it's a slight blemish on the whole thing. It doesn't really make you throw your hands up in the air and go, "Oh, come on!" It's not the highlight of the movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't bother me as much as it bothers David.
The concept is interesting. And obviously we're willing to accept certain things in the Star Wars galaxy that aren't real. More than a few. But there's something about a giant creature in the vacuum of space, David already mentioned the space whales, that I find difficult to reconcile, even with the suspension of disbelief for the Force and aliens and sound in space. Great point you made, Sean, about the film is so good that it can weather this issue. Less than a minute after this scene, I wasn't thinking about it. I'd already moved on, and I was fine. It is a little cringeworthy at this point, though. When I watch Empire, I wish this wasn't here, I guess is how I feel about it right now.
Well, that's something they could have done in the special edition, taking it away.
Like, a lot of this is perception, and things come to us at certain points in our lives, and because of who and we are and what our experiences are, and all of those things, they resonate with us and they hit us, and we accept or we don't accept. And as children, we didn't really think about the vacuum of space. Like, we weren't really worried about that. We weren't really worried about. Well, at least I don't think we were. I mean, I know I wasn't. I wasn't really worried about. Can a slug actually survive vacuum space? Like, it was a cool concept.
So the Falcon flees the space slug, narrow escape. Han, believing the hyperdrive is fixed, moves the Falcon out of the asteroid field to discover that the hyperdrive has not been fixed. He's facing one Star Destroyer with more on the way, and his solution to the problem is to stop running. So take me through this maneuver, moving to attack position.
Finally, time to take the fight to them. And, he had some background knowledge about where to potentially hide, and by attacking the situation, was able to hide the ship and be able to bide some time instead of going back to the slug. So I thought it was really cool.
This is part of the legend of Han Solo, right? There had always been the implication that Solo was a former Imperial. And there's been a lot of legends about that, and finally, of course, we finally got the official version in the Solo film, but up to this point, we still didn't really know anything. To be a successful criminal, to be good at the job of smuggling, you have to know how the Imperial Starfleet works. And so for him to take that little piece of knowledge and be able to hide until we get to that point, with the garbage and the breaking up and all that stuff. There's a couple of things that also are very interesting. And, one is the Imperial mindset. Everything's better because it's bigger. Everything is better because it's more destructive and more powerful. Even though they have TIE fighters and even though they have all these tactics, they're just really not equipped to deal with one small ship. And they're really not equipped to deal with creative thinking. Again, the monolithic attitude of the Empire is just, crush everything with sheer force. And you don't really have to think about tactics. When I outnumber you 100-1, I'm going to win. And, we might lose a few guys in the process. We might crash a few Star Destroyers in the asteroid field. But we're going to win. And we're going to get you. It's inevitable. So for a small ship to turn around and chase you down and come right between your eyes, I'm pretty sure that every Imperial commander at that point is like, well, this is new. They didn't teach us that at the Academy, right? Like, I have no idea what's going on right now. How do I adapt to that? And the other thing is that here's, Han Solo, again, faced with the insurmountable odds. Your rear deflector shields have failed. Your butt is no longer covered. So what do? You put everything into the forward shields, you turn around and you go right at those guys and give them something to think about. Now, he never fully intended to attack or fight or, take down the entire fleet by himself, but he created enough confusion in the moment by making that maneuver and taking that tactic that he was able then to, clamp himself to the side of the ship and then kind of blend into the surroundings long enough to ultimately try and get away. And so it shows us why Han Solo is such a great character, and him leveraging his, less than legitimate past, in the fight against the Empire. So I thought it was great. I enjoyed it. And ultimately where it leads us to.
There's a convenience to the scene. To this point, the Millennium Falcon has been pursued by TIE fighters, lots of them. And when it clears the asteroid field, the destroyer that's pursuing it has no TIE fighters out and about. If TIE fighters had been following the Falcon, the maneuver wouldn't have worked, right? One of the TIE pilots would have spotted the Falcon. So it's very convenient that the destroyer hasn't launched any fighters.
Yes, there is a little bit of convenience in it, of course. But it's not unlike the moment in episode 1 where we had the full planetary blockade and then we didn't. It's not as groan-worthy as a space lock, I'll just say that.
True. Captain Needa decides to apologize to Lord Vader in person.
Mistake.
Yes, Vader kills him.
Apology accepted.
He kills Captain Needa, yes. An apology accepted Captain Needa has become a very famous line in Star Wars. I know it's not a comedic moment, and yet I chuckle. I chuckle every time. How about you?
Oh yeah, it adds a little bit of levity to Vader. I mean, it goes along with the line from Rogue One where don't choke on your aspirations. I mean, he's got a funny side, that Vader.
Jeez. I appreciate it. It's funny. It's funny for people who appreciate dark humor. Okay, it's what he's saying in that moment is, yes, it's partially humorous, but it's also a warning to everyone around him. There is only one price for failure, and that is death. It is funny. I mean, yeah, because we're all like in the audience. It doesn't affect us. We're not going to get forced joke. You do get a little bit of a chuckle, and you do see that there's a bit of the sarcasm that, of course, we see developed in the prequels and in the Clone Wars cartoon. That the Anakin Skywalker, who's very cavalier and very full of himself, and also has a lot of great one-liners. I mean, you still see that personality shining through in a way, but the Empire could very well have a shortage of good officers after a couple of tours with Vader. And that portion of it could potentially become problematic as you think about it, because it's like we've killed an admiral and we've killed a captain. And let's just hope that the Imperial Academy is churning out lots of good young officers, because there's some job openings happening in real time.
Vader is the epitome of next man up.
Oh, dude, he's next man up. He's like the bad HR director. Like,
Who do you complain to, by the way? What HR guy do you dude? I can't go talk to him. Can you, Mr. HR guy? Can you go talk to Vader for me? I'm just gonna take the shuttle and I'm out.
So the Falcon is hidden on the backside of the Star Destroyer's tower, and Han, through his knowledge of the Imperial forces, knows that the fleet will break up and go to hyperspace, and before they do, they will dump their garbage. So the Falcon waits for that moment to drift away with the junk. It does so, but let's back up for a moment. Before Captain Neeta's ship spies the Falcon coming out of the asteroid field, Darth Vader has brought in a group of bounty hunters. We get a great look at what the galaxy has to offer in terms of criminal element, definitely an underground element. We have a very short conversation, an Imperial officer talking to one of the bridge crew saying that we don't need this scum. And there's Bosk looking down into the control pit, just gives us a growl, and then we pan from Bosk to Forlom to Zuckuss to IG-88, Dengar, Boba Fett. Boba Fett is the only bounty hunter Vader addresses, saying no disintegrations. And at that point, Vader's interrupted. Captain Neeta's ship has found the Falcon, and we've already walked through that. But should it just have been Boba Fett? Should there have been dialogue? Do you like it the way it is? Are you curious about the characters as they're just shown to us, but they have no speaking lines? What do you think?
I didn't necessarily like the fact that they just kind of stood there. I mean, it would have been nice for them to do something. Again, going back to the comic book, after Vader gives the information to the bounty hunters, it says, Boba Fett, do not disappoint me. Then Boba Fett actually says, given a free hand, I've never disappointed anyone except those who hoped to escape me. Boba Fett's the only important one of the group, so that, for me, that was enough.
So I thought it was interesting that, the whole scene. Vader is showing the only real creative thinking on the part of the Empire. Yes, we're the Empire, and yes, we're all about shiny boots and press suits, but I am going to use any means necessary, even if it means going into the underworld and dealing with bounty hunters and anyone else for that matter. This portion of society that is beyond Imperial control is useful, and he is willing to employ it, and he is willing to embrace it as a means to an end. And just seeing those characters who are unique and different, and their design and their costume is so out of step with all the guys in the olive drab uniforms and the stormtroopers and all that stuff. It's a stark contrast that is presented to the audience. And I didn't necessarily think we needed a whole lot of dialogue with them. I mean, again, it's Vader's scene. He is giving direction and directive. He is, relentless again in his pursuit of the mission. He's saying, I will pay you whatever it takes. We're going to do all this stuff. Yes, he calls out Boba Fett in that moment, and this is one of the reasons why there is such, the Boba Fett fandom is so legion. Is that if Darth Vader is willing to call you out and address you as almost as an equal, and say, I know you, I know who you are, and I know your style, and I'm not going to have any of that on this job. That's all the dialogue I needed in that moment. It's because it established Boba Fett as probably the best one of the guys there, Vader is covering his bases by having all of them there. But, we're introduced to probably the coolest looking character outside of Vader at this point in the series of films. And, his compadres or his cohort or his peers of other bounty hunters. I thought IG-88 was really cool, a great, interesting idea as a character, the killer robot. I love Bosk. Through a fluke of central casting and working at Pinewood Studios, he's the cross genre or cross franchise character. He's actually wearing a costume from the Doctor Who series from the 60s. But yeah, I mean, it's a great scene. Again, it's just showing the lengths that Vader is willing to go to achieve this mission.
Boba Fett leaves the Executor, flies to the location of Captain Needa's Star Destroyer, clearly suspecting a trick from Han Solo. He's right. He is rewarded. Fett knew the Falcon would pick the moment of the trash time to leave.
He's trying to think of it as a situation where, what would a smuggler do? And, maybe if I just going off of a hunch, I think this kind of just goes with the idea that maybe Boba Fett has been down this road before. It helps with his character, thinking, hey, I'm smarter than all these other guys. Like Sean said, he's the best at what he does for a reason. So.
Yeah, it's the whole situation where he gets his ship put in the garbage. Because when Han releases his ship after the fleet goes to hyperspace, and then he rights his ship and takes off, and then you see Boba Fett come out of the garbage with his ship. So he's in the garbage. So
yeah,
all
I
the
guess
ships
he doesn't know that the Falcon. Well, he must know that the Falcon was dealing with Needa's ship, and so it's likely that the Falcon hid in or around Needa's ship.
So what we could deduce then from all of this is like what David said. So Boba Fett knows of Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon, and knows that Han Solo is a smuggler, and that he's going to be doing something, some kind of trick, some kind of subtle or creative action in order to avoid the fleet. He's probably also deduced, like you say, that the last interaction that he had with the fleet was with Needa's ship. So if he could be near Needa or in the vicinity of his ship. There's a few questions there, but for the most part, I think it's just the other bounty hunters didn't think of this. So again, it shows Boba Fett's prowess, but it's kind of the level of him understanding his prey. Because like you say, if he knows Solo, he knows he's a smuggler. If he knows he's a smuggler, he knows smuggler tricks. I think it's really cool. I think it's a great cat and mouse game. I think it's a chess level thing that's going on there with Han and the Empire.
So regarding, I agree with the cat and mouse part. My, I guess, biggest semi-complaint with this is why didn't, once, he was ejected into and started flying in the garbage, and Boba Fett did the same thing, and then Han took off, and then Boba Fett took off. Two things come to mind. One is, why didn't Boba Fett engage and just start fighting him? And two, why didn't the Falcon detect Boba Fett falling?
I think part of it is, again, in the dialogue between Vader and Fett, no disintegrations. You can't just start blasting the ship right there. We don't know this up front. It becomes apparent later in the film, but he needs them for a specific purpose. He needs to capture these people who are close to Luke in order to draw Luke out. And so we can't just blow up the ship. And we see him, I don't know if he's in communication or whatever, but as they're all taking off and going away, he's probably relaying to Vader what's going on. Okay, I have eyes on they are flying on this vector, which you could easily calculate and say, oh, he's going to the Lando system. No, just kidding. He's going to Bespin. And at that point, because they are going sublight, he knows now that they won't get there, as fast as the fleet could. So, he doesn't necessarily need to do anything crazy. He just needs to stay far enough back from their sensors and make sure they don't change course, and then just keep relaying that information. It's probably the easiest paycheck he's ever earned at this point. He's like, I just got to follow this guy who's driving on the family wagon over to that planet over there, and I just got to make sure he just goes to that planet. And I just call Vader 3 times and check in and say, yeah, it's still going on that planet. Yeah, it's still going on that planet. And then they can go and they can rough up Lando and set up the trap. But yeah, I guess, the whole thing about how far away do you have to be from another ship before you don't show up on their sensors? Maybe they had to cannibalize the system, or maybe the sensors aren't working as well as they should. I don't know. I mean, again, I'm writing the plot for people, but it's not something that really stood out to me to make the scene, face palm worthy or otherwise unacceptable.
One of the things that sets Fett apart as the best is he considers the Falcon's, air quotes, attack on the Star Destroyer to be an indication that it can't go to hyperspace. If it could have gone to hyperspace, it would have just jumped to hyperspace. There would have been no need to buzz the Star Destroyer. It's a dangerous move. So from there, from that, he understands that the Falcon is still damaged, and he just needs to stick around to figure out where it's hiding. But he's confident that it's hiding. All right, so the Falcon will head off to Cloud City. Han and Leia have chosen a destination. We will move to Dagobah and Yoda and Luke's training.
The Empire Strikes Back Anniversary Show Part 2 has come to an end. Thank you for joining us. If you liked the content, please tell others and subscribe to the channel Galactic Initiative. Thank you to Sean and David. Galactic Initiative is not authorized or endorsed by Lucasfilm Limited. The name Star Wars and all related materials are registered trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, all rights reserved. Other products and company names are trademarks of their respective holders. Use does not imply affiliation or endorsement. Before you go about your business, remember,
these aren't the droids we're looking for.